Members, it's 6:30, so I'll commence the meeting. In the absence of a chairman or vice chairman this evening, the first order of business will be to appoint a chairman and vice chairman. So can I have nominations, please? Councillor. And can I have a seconder for that? Any other nominations? In which case, can we vote on Councillor Taylor for chairman for this evening's meeting? In which case, confirm Councillor Taylor as chairman for the meeting. And Councillor Chairman, can you appoint a vice chairman as well, please?
I don't mind who I have, but I think I'll perhaps nominate Councillor Mrs. Tucker for Vice Chair. Thank you. Everybody agreed? Thank you very much. Thank you. Apologies for the delay. We're just getting to grips with some new equipment here, which is obviously a little bit high-tech for us. Well, this is my privilege and pleasure to be chairing this meeting this evening. Could I start? Oh, yes, I have to do the fire evacuation procedures, a formality we hope. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exits are located at the rear and side of this room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. We hopefully won't need that. Next, apologies for absence. I've received apologies from Councillor Godison and Councillor Sherlock, who is being replaced for this meeting only by Councillor Mrs. Reid, and Councillor Mitchell, who is being replaced for this meeting only by Councillor Round. Are there any other apologies or replacements? No? I believe Councillor Barnes is on holiday, so he's also absent. Okay. Just moving then through the agenda. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest on any items on the agenda? No? I have no urgent items that anyone's told us about. Next is to confirm the minutes of the last meeting, which is at paper A. Agreed? Agreed. Thank you. There are no referrals from other committees or council, and there are no issues referred by Cabinet. So we can go straight to the applications. Before I begin, we just need to explain the procedure to the people who are visiting us so that they know what's going on this evening. The job of this committee is to make decisions on applications which for various reasons have been referred here. The broad procedure is to hear first from the officers who will introduce it. Then, if there's a parish council representative, they will come forward. Any objectors, applicant and ward councillor. Following each representation, there'll be an opportunity for the committee to ask questions. Then there will follow the discussion and a decision will be made. Now, each speaker who comes to the chair, which is at the end of the table here, will be allowed 4 minutes, which is what our new bit of equipment is all about. And if there is more than one person speaking for or against an application, they will have to share that 4 minutes. So you'll need to work it out between you who speaks. You will be politely told when there is a minute left. And once you have returned to your seat, then no further comment can be made. Okay. Microphones, just to let you know that only one microphone can operate at a time. So the chaps on the end will show you how to operate the microphone on the table, but you just have to remember to turn it on before you speak and then turn it off when you finish speaking, so that we have one at a time. Coming to that. Yes, could you please, I've just been reminded, switch off your mobile phones or put them to silent. Thank you. Right, so we can move straight then to item number 1 on the agenda, 19 Barn Lane, Oakley. If I could ask, is there a parish council representative here? No? In that case, could I ask Mr. Butler, our objector, to come to the chair, and while you're doing so, I'll ask the officer to introduce it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This application seeks permission for extensions to and the raising of the roof of the existing property, including the insertion of dormer windows and roof lights. The application is recommended for approval subject to conditions. Members viewed the application site last Friday, and a summary of the viewing is outlined in the update paper. Members asked for details of the distances of the development to the boundaries to be provided, and these have been stated within the update paper. The update paper also refers to an amended plan which has been received to correctly show all windows and doors proposed on the floor plans within the elevation, and the drawing number condition has been amended accordingly. Questions have been raised with regard to the scenario should the retaining walls of the building not be structurally sound to support the development, resulting in the entire existing building needing to be demolished, what would happen? And officers have responded to this within the update paper provided. So just to conclude, the application is recommended for approval subject to the conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody want to ask any questions of officers at this stage? Or there'll be opportunity later if you'd rather. Okay. Okay, Mr. Butler, you have 4 minutes. Thank you.
I live to the south of the proposed extension at 19 Barn Lane in 19A Barn Lane. First of all, I would confirm that from the very first parish council meeting over 2 years ago, my wife and I had said that we had no objection to a reasonable extension at number 19, providing it was not too big. At the moment, the property is a 2-bedroom bungalow with what I believe to be a bedroom, bathroom stroke toilet built into the roof space, with a prefabricated garage. This is not a chalet bungalow as excessively described by Mr. Davey and Mayfield Design. It is in fact a detached bungalow with accommodation in the roof as confirmed by the building inspectorate. The latest proposal is to turn this bungalow into a 4-bedroomed house consisting of a kitchen, stroke lounge, stroke dining room, a lounge, a dining room, a study, a utility room, a cloakroom and a toilet on the ground floor, coupled with a double garage. The first floor has 4 bedrooms, 2 ensuite and a bathroom. This building will be approximately 18 metres long, compared with the existing bungalow, which is 8 metres long. I believe Mr. Davey would like to present this building as a chalet bungalow, built so as to match number 17 Barn Lane, which is a chalet bungalow. But one can see on the drawing that the fascias on the side and rear elevations, which clearly show a 2-storey building with a roof. In other words, a house with a couple of flat roofs and 3 dormer windows at the front. This will be the only house on this side of the road where frontages are nearer to the road. Whereas number 17, the chalet bungalow to the north, called the Owlets, has an habitable ground floor depth of 10.7 metres. The proposed extension at number 19 is 18 metres. There are 2 existing houses in Barn Lane, one at the bottom of the lane on the opposite side of the road, and one at the top of the road in a small cul-de-sac. There are none in the main part of Barn Lane, although there are 3 or 4 chalet bungalows which have been built when the existing bungalows have been demolished. The original property at 17 Barn Lane, now the Owlets, was a 2-bedroom bungalow with the same frontage as 19. However, the property had to be totally demolished as it was deemed by the council not to have the necessary area for cars to park, turn and exit.
Mr. Butler, you've got about a minute left, okay.
I should now bring to your attention a rather deceitful, although possibly allowable feature. On the drawing, the area of wall unshaded on the north and front elevations, although unmarked, are walls that I think are not deemed to be demolished. Why is this? I think the reason is that if everything was demolished, then they would not be able to describe this new construction as extensions to the existing, but would have to go for full planning approval from a new building, As far as I can see, the planning department does not consider construction details, and so this item would go straight to building regulations, where the public has no influence at all. The building department would say that the foundations for this old wall...
Excuse me, could I ask you to wind up in a brief sentence, please, if you could? We've got the gist of that one.
Yes. It is now my submission, however, that this is a totally and irrelative supposition, as there is no written indication whatsoever on the plans that these walls are to be left. Therefore, the description of erection of 2-storey extensions, etc., would be null and void.
Thank you. I think I'm going to have to stop you there, but we have got an opportunity to ask questions of you, so we can draw you out further if you wish.
Turn this off?
Yes, please. No, stay there. First of all, does anybody want to ask questions on the committee of Mr. Butler? I would like to ask you one question myself. You haven't really got to what you believe will be the impact on your particular property of this development. Just very briefly, could you just describe that to us?
I think it would take a lot of light from our house. It's been drawn on drawings showing our bungalow to be bigger than the actual building proposed, which is nowhere near. I think the car parking is bad, and I think it is dangerous. I think the front facade of a house with 3 dormer windows does not go in with the bungalows or chalet bungalows that are already in the road.
Thank you very much. Could you switch off? Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Butler before I ask him to go back? No? Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, I believe we do have Mr. and Mrs. Davey here. Would you like to come forward? And you have 4 minutes between you.
The planning application was first made as an inquiry in September last year. This was followed by a meeting with the planning officer to find the best way forward so as to have a reasonable chance of approval when submitted as a full application. Following the suggestions gained at that meeting, the plans were revised, including reducing the depth to the rear, and was subsequently submitted as an application in November last year. During the planning procedure, some concerns were raised by neighbours and the planning department and the highways department, which we addressed with amendments to conform to planning policies and to address some of the objections. To make sure we were doing our best not only to keep within policy boundaries, but also to consider any issues our neighbours had, we arranged a meeting with the planning officer and the senior manager who were dealing with our application. It was agreed at that meeting that we would reduce the ridge height to more in keeping with the street scene and hopefully appease an objector to the particular element of the design. We also responded to the objection from number 19A and reduced the size and changed the roof for the rear single-storey extension to allow a greater distance from their boundary and to allow more light into the rear of their property. I have attended all the Oakley Parish Council meetings and have been less than impressed by the way the meetings were handled. In addition, we was declined a visit from a parish councillor when requested. At the last meeting, none of the councillors had a full set of amended plans and still agreed between themselves to object to the application on the grounds of us changing our 2-bedroom bungalow, which in fact has 3 bedrooms, into a 4-bedroom house. The original building was sold to us as a 3-bedroom chalet style dwelling, and although our plans would increase its size from a 4-bedroom dwelling, we have maintained a chalet style frontage in keeping with the street scene. Having submitted revised plans, we heard nothing more, so assumed all the concerns that were raised at the second meeting had been addressed. This assumption appeared to be correct, as we were later informed that this application was being written up for approval by the planning officer. The main surprise was that although this application had been ongoing since submission last November, and that there were always written objections, that a councillor had taken until 21st of May to declare an interest. The street, as in most streets with an abundance of single-storey dwellings, has seen various developments over the years, including a new dwelling next to us at number 17 that was approved with a 2-storey element extending further to the rear of our property than we are proposing with our single-storey element beyond our neighbours at number 19A. You have heard we have tried very hard for a long time to get the plans right so as to be sympathetic to the street scene and conform to planning policies and appease our neighbours.
You've got a minute to go, Mr. Davey.
Okay. We have lived in the village for over 3 years now and have had family members living in the village for over 30 years. Our 2 boys, aged 6 and 10, attend the local village school and are fully integrated in village life, including being members of numerous clubs such as Scouts, Beavers, football, cricket and Messy Church. We hope you will consider this application favourably for approval, as our purpose for extending our dwelling is to accommodate our family in future years as they grow.
Could you switch off your microphone?
Sorry.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. and Mrs. Davey from the committee? No? Thank you very much. You can sit down. Before we go into discussion, I'm the ward councillor, and I was the one who recommended that it come to committee because obviously was waiting for the recommendation from the officer before I decided whether or not to bring it to committee. I don't want to say too much at this stage because I genuinely do want to hear what the committee has to say about this. It's obviously quite contentious. The question we have to answer is this design appropriate in terms of size and location, and does it address the concerns of the appeal inspector who dismissed the previous design? The plot is quite narrow, which necessitates an enlargement extending back into the rear garden quite a long way. And if you look at the house, the other side of this, which has already been replaced, you can see that there is obviously quite an impact. Do we want this to be perpetuated or not? At this stage, I think I will say no more, but just hear what the committee has to say in discussion. Okay, could I ask Councillor Round first, if you'd like to speak?
Thank you, Chair. For the benefit of the webcast, this is not my handbag down here. I was concerned that it does appear as a very large extension. You know, we sometimes talk about subservient to the host. The host won't be seen after this. So it is. On looking at the layout on the site, it does appear to be a very, very large extension. I think it was interesting to note on the visit that the garden of number 19A is quite a bit higher than the application site. So anything that goes on that site will be seen quite extensively. The front door of 19A, of course, will suddenly be thrown into darkness because the front door is on the side of number 19A. So you're looking at the recommendations. You know, I have to say, my view is that there will be an overbearing impact on number 19A, and that would not respect the amenity of the neighbouring occupiers. So you know, that is my concern, that it doesn't sit with the surrounding developments in a sympathetic manner.
Thank you very much. Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. First, I've got a question of the officers, please. We've been hearing a lot about bungalows, chalet bungalows, and large extensions. Could I refer to the other proposed elevations page in the application? Now, if I just saw that without relation to proposed extensions to a chalet bungalow, I would call that a standard 2-storey, 4-bedroom house. Could I ask the officers what they consider that to be? If you look at that in isolation, the finished product, if you will, how would you describe that structure?
Yeah, I mean, I can see where members, well, where you're coming from in that respect. I think within the report it makes reference to the fact that the front design has the eaves dormers, which is why it talks about the aspects of a more of a chalet style appearance from the front elevation, but obviously it appreciates that from the side and the rear it has first floor openings, which is more characteristic of a dwelling house. So I think the report's quite clear that it kind of balances those different views of the house within it. But again, I think that the frontage, I think before we have spoken about it being a kind of a chalet style because of those dormer windows. With dwelling house, more typically you would expect kind of first floor openings like you have on the side and the rear.
Thank you for that opinion. I have to go along with Councillor Round in respect of the host dwelling and the relationship, because I don't see the host dwelling in these proposed elevations. That's why you look at it. They just don't exist there. And it was a point that the inspector quoted, and I believe it was under policy E1, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, extensions should respect their host building. In addition, and it gives a various reference there, and it also identifies in the report that there's nothing specific about bungalows, but generally, as a principle, it should be related to bungalows just like it's related to any other dwelling house. So that's how I read that. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's specifically written out in that paragraph on 6 of 44. I noticed that there's some recognition it might not be one fits all type of approach, but in this particular case I think the host dwelling does disappear in this style of extensions, the way that they're presented here. Also, we did visit the garden next door in 19A, and it's quite surprising when you're standing on the lawn and the rest of the ground that goes back, how much more elevated that happens to be. And we got a very good idea, because I think I pasted it out myself, on referral to the drawings, of how far back that extension goes. And it really put it into perspective when we looked at the potential height of the single-story extension coming out the back, and then the bulk of the principal part of the dwelling house. Also, just note in the report, there's an awful lot of subjective statements. It is considered to be. Well, I turn around to myself and thinking, it is considered to be acceptable. By whom? I know it's the officer that's writing it, but we members can have subjective views as well. This is the advantage of going on to the sites and actually developing that subjective view. In my mind, I don't think that the amended plans have yet to satisfy policy E1. I will go along with, it hasn't really addressed all the issues in that particular policy about subservience, and I can't support this particular application.
Thank you. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question really for the officers and possibly a little bit of help with the pictures. I obviously wasn't able to be on the site visit, but it says there were documents or submitted by the applicant for the street scene. Have we got those, or could someone just kind of illustrate on these pictures just to clarify for me? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hood.
It was quite interesting to go and view it on Friday, and something that Mr. Butler said, he said that he was quite happy with a reasonable extension, and I think that's the crunch, isn't it? Is it reasonable? Also the impact. We looked at the 3 properties, and one had been demolished and rebuilt, and that was quite huge as well, and then suddenly did 2 other ones together. Going into the garden of Mr. Butler's home, I stepped beside the lounge and envisaged from the lounge how the impact would be with this suggested extension. And I think there's no question in my mind that the pleasure of sitting in the lounge will be destroyed for Mr. and Mrs. Butler because it is far too big, and I certainly can't support the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Councillor Round.
Thank you, Chair. Have you have any other speakers or? No, no. I think I've listened to what other members have said, and I would propose that we move for refusal on the grounds of the basis of what I spoke about earlier.
Thank you very much. That's been moved. Councillor Eyre, would you like to say something before we go to the vote?
Thank you, Chair. I merely wished to say that I went on the site visit as well. I recognise it is very contentious, and I recognise there are sound arguments both for and against. I would just like to have it on record that I think the applicant has done everything in his power to get this right, and I think it would be very sad for him and his wife and family if we do turn it down. I understand the reasons that are being put forward for refusal, but I think we should all recognise that he has worked as hard as he possibly can to get this right, and it's not the first time. So if we do refuse it, I hope that he will be given as much support as possible to get it absolutely right so that it can be approved next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a good point. Are there any more speakers? Yes, Councillor Miller?
Just to say, I'll second the motion.
So it's been moved and seconded for refusal. All those in favour of refusal? Yes, and against? Thank you. That's carried then. It's been voted to refuse. We have to give reasons. I think it's fairly and squarely in policy E1 that it would not respect the host building due to size, bulk and design. It's still out of context with the surrounding scene and would not respect the amenities of the neighbouring property at 19A. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 2 now, which is Manor Farm, Hackwood Lane, Tunworth. Could Mr. Darnell come to the table whilst officers introduce? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for the erection of a 3-bed agricultural workers' dwelling and the removal of an existing mobile home at Manor Farm, Tunworth. The site lies within the countryside, the Tunworth Conservation Area, and adjacent to agricultural buildings, some of which are listed. The key issue is whether it can be demonstrated that there is an essential need for the applicant to live permanently on the holding and whether this could be sustained. Members will note from the main report that Reading Agricultural Consultants, who provide the Council with agricultural advice on applications of this nature, have advised that given the current stock numbers on the holding, no functional requirement can be demonstrated. I would draw members' attention to the update sheet, and there's some additional comments received from Reading Agricultural Consultants in relation to the additional financial information provided by the applicant. And you'll note that given the minimal overall profit that's been achieved, the RAC have advised that the enterprise is not financially viable and could not be sustained. The update paper also notes an objection received from the landscape officer. Also, comments received from the Highway Authority raising no objection to the application subject to a number of conditions, and also that 4 additional letters of support have been received. And one further point that although the Section 106 agreement has almost reached completion, at this point in time it remains uncompleted, and therefore a refusal on this basis remains, along with 3 other refusal reasons as noted in the main report.
Thank you very much. Any questions at this stage to the officers? No? There'll be opportunity later. Mr. Darnell, you have 4 minutes.
Good evening, everybody. My family have been farming at Manor Farm, Tunner for 80 years as tenants of a Harriet estate. When I took over the tenancy in 2008, the main farmhouse was removed from the farm tenancy and is no longer available to me. In 2010, this committee gave permission for a mobile home on site to develop business. One of the main reasons we are here tonight seems to be regarding the essential need for someone to be on site, which according to Reading Agricultural Consultancy is not the case. Well, I strongly disagree. One of their main claims to be that the business has not developed in a way that was proposed in 2010. This is clearly not the case, as I shall now explain. Regarding the equestrian side of the business, since 2010 I have constructed 2 stable blocks, each comprising 5 stables each, a project for which I was able to obtain a grant from the Rural Development Programme for England, a process which entailed rigorous financial checks regarding the viability and sustainability of the business. The livery side of the business is now running at full capacity with a total of 15 horses on site, all of which require out-of-hours supervision for welfare and security reasons. I fail to understand how Reading Agricultural can say that this side of the business has not been developed. Moving on to the cattle side of the business, the farm has a herd of pedigree South Devon cattle. It is very important that cows are monitored when they are ready to calve. The cows will be checked every 2 to 3 hours as a matter of course, and when they start to calve, they will be looked at every half an hour to make sure they're okay. If they have not calved after 2 to 3 hours, it may be necessary to intervene. Over the last few years, I've had everything from breached births, prolapsed cows to caesareans, all of which can lead to loss of cow and calf. A replacement pedigree cow will cost 2,000 to 3,000 if bought in, so any loss is serious. It's also very important to monitor a calf after it is born, because if it doesn't suckle its mother within 6 hours, it will again be necessary to intervene to ensure the calf receives an adequate amount of colostrum, very important just after birth. All of these things can happen at any time of day or night and are relevant whether you have 10 cows or 100. I believe it is essential to be on site. As for numbers, the herd stood at 12 in 2009 and now the total is 36, of which 30 are cows or heifers that will go to a bull shortly. Again, I cannot understand why Reading Agricultural think the herd has not developed. I also take issue with their claim that the business is not financially viable, when the accounts show that the business is solvent and has made a profit for the last 3 years running. Moving on to the design. We put a lot of thought into the design of the house as we wanted something that would fit into the Tunworth Conservation Area. The small scale and proportions of the design have been specifically considered to ensure it doesn't compete with the old farmhouse, which cannot be seen from the proposed site. The site is well screened from the road and to the west by a mature wood. To the east it will be screened by the existing agricultural buildings. The oak frame is a carbon steel material and has a lifespan of several hundred years.
Sorry to interrupt, you've just got 1 minute left, okay,
Yeah.
just under.
And over time it will weather and settle into a landscape and will produce an attractive, sustainable and long-lasting house that will add to the heritage character of the area. A generic brick design might well be functional, but not as sustainable or attractive, and would actually stand out more and for all the wrong reasons. I should also like to point out there have been no objections from members of the public, and there have been letters from local residents to the planners supporting both the application and the design. As far as the Section 106 is concerned, my solicitor said it's in the hands of Basingstoke Council and he's waiting for a reply on that one, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Just about right. Are there any questions for Mr. Darnell? Councillor Round.
Thank you, Chair. Can you just help me understand a little bit more about agricultural tenancy in terms of, am I right in thinking that as an agricultural tenancy, you effectively have the tenancy of that land for life?
That is right, yes, yes.
Any other questions? No? Yes, Councillor Tomlin.
Sorry, yeah, good evening. So, just to clear up a little bit on that, this house is going to be your house, or is it going to be the Herriot Estates house and you're going to therefore rent it?
No, the house will be mine and will be built by me.
Thank you. Any more questions? Thank you, Mr. Darnell. Councillor Raphael, as the ward councillor.
Madam Chairman, thank you for allowing me to address the meeting. As you know, I support this application. This came before this committee before, and this committee granted the permission for the caravan to be present on the basis of agricultural need. There were several bases, but two main ones were that the stables would develop, well, that's been done, and that the herd would be developed to 40 cows. Well, it's on 36, so I don't think it's a bad effort. And the other reasons were because of security. I can tell the committee that I have assisted Mr. Darnell with chasing his cows down the road on occasions when they've got out, because they do get out and they can get out at any time. What he hasn't told you, but you do also need to know, is that he farms the agricultural land for many acres around, and that obviously involves long hours, especially at harvest time, and then he's got to deal with the cows on top. So it's a pretty full-day business, if not all-night business. And I have to say, this committee was satisfied last time it was necessary for someone to be on site all the time. I know you know, but I'll just put it in as part of the argument that we suffer from crime. Rural areas suffer from crime. We've had alpacas stolen from the village. The neighbouring area of land's had sheep stolen quite recently, and we also get people who like to knock on people's back doors saying they're advertising for something to sell. So it is necessary, there's no doubt about that. And as when they talk about profit, well, you know, it's a business. Businesses don't necessarily want to make big profits because then they get taxed on big profits. But the fact is, it is viable. He's here, and after all, he's putting in a planning application, so it must be viable. It's not some sort of pipe dream. I just have to say to the committee, there are no grounds to say that the need that was justified to this committee 3 years ago isn't still justified now. Can I deal with the actual house design? It's lovely. I'd like to live in it. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was good when I saw it. And that's what the village think. They all like it. The nearest person who could possibly see it out of a window if he stood on tiptoes likes it too. And Tunworth is a place that, apart from recently when you granted permission for a bungalow to be converted, really doesn't have much in way of new housing. And the village wants to see Mr. Darnell living in the village, farming the land, and believes that this design achieves that. So I'd urge you to support this and not say that, well, because he's a farm worker, he should have a plain brick-built, plain construction. I'd call boring. Should have something that is totally in keeping with the village. And I should just say one thing. There was a slight mix-up when the application went in. I think the officers hadn't reviewed the original file because they got in a bit of a tangle with the old farmhouse. They kept saying, "Oh, there is a farmhouse in the farm." Well, there isn't. It's not a part of the farm, and that's a 300-year-old building that can't have investment put in it whilst the tenant lives in it, because it needs to recoup the money through a brand new tenancy to someone who can afford the appropriate rent, which he couldn't do. So, and he wasn't able to inherit the tenancy because of the way it went through the family.
Thank you, Councillor Fell. Are there any questions for the ward councillor? Yes, Councillor Mrs. Tucker.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Mark. In some ways, it possibly should have gone to Mr. Darnell, but it was only the last comment that he made when he was speaking. He said that the house would be his. Yes. Now, if we were to grant it, we would normally want it to be part of the land that he farms. If it's his, but the land is actually the estate's, how does that work? Because it doesn't work where I'm concerned.
Councillor Fell, we can refer this to one of the officers if you'd rather. Well, we can't really have him back at the chair, so.
Freehold of the property would be his, but it will have an agricultural tie on the property. There has to be someone working with the land who can live in it.
But not tied to the land, it would just be an agricultural... Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Councillor Fell? No, thank you very much. Does anybody want to clear up that with the officers? Do ask questions at this stage. Yes, Councillor Round.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, one of my questions was that if we were minded to support this on the exceptional circumstances that there is an enterprise running there, is how we can condition that, you know, things like the land and the house stay intact, because, you know, there has been a little bit of planning by stealth in terms of there is a farmhouse there and the land's been sold off, and how do we stop that snowball effect if it is within our powers to try and stop that? So I'd ask that question. And secondly, in terms of the Reading Agricultural Consultancy reports, when they're doing this viability study, do they take into consideration the service of delivery in terms of keeping the horses? Is that part of their assessment, or are they saying that's not a farming activity? Thank you.
I'll take the second question first. Yes, RSC are fully aware of the two elements of the enterprise here, and they understand the amount of livestock involved on both elements, and their assessment's been based on current stock numbers and also the financial information provided. They assess applications of this nature, you know, all the time, so they're used to looking at information that's been provided. And the first question, if the application were to be approved, then a condition could be imposed so that the house would have to be agriculturally tied, and only persons solely or mainly employed could reside in the dwelling, but they wouldn't be able to tie it to the land.
So you're saying there's nothing to stop the land being sold into other hands, but the dwelling could only be used by somebody in agricultural work, not necessarily on that land?
Yeah, that's correct.
Any other questions? If not, be welcome to go into discussion. Any comments? Councillor Miller, sorry.
Close enough, Chair. Thank you. There was a question raised about the design of the house. One thing I did towards the end of the viewing was, and most of us, I think, had a look at the existing farmhouse across the road. That's the design of the existing farmhouse. So this is in keeping with the local area. I have no doubt about it, and I agree with the comment that was made earlier that a plain brick residential building would look totally out of place. And I think this is what is proposed is very sympathetic with the environment. The fact there is a wood behind it on two sides of the particular plot. In my younger days, I did have experience working on a mixed farm with horses and with cattle and a few other species of animals. And the farmhouse is traditionally right in the middle of where all the animals are. You know, if you look at any farm, that's normally how they're orientated for the reasons that the applicant made. While we were there, there was a week-old calf in the byre. Now, he had to be in attendance, and I think that was the whole rationale between the caravan. Now this, well, trailer, whatever you want to call it, it's a mobile home. Now, the family having been there for 80 years, he had to get somewhere to live on the farm to be able to allow this particular herd of South Devons to accumulate and grow, which was one of the objectives of making it a viable business, and I think he's proven that. And I think the number mentioned was 36, in fact it's 37, with that calf having just arrived as we went on the viewing. I feel it's most appropriate, it's necessary. The applicant, the family has been there for 80 years. I don't think he's going to be running away anytime soon. It's in the blood of the family. And as I say, having my connections to the land and to animals, I can see that this is a very sensible way of going forward, that he has a permanency there, and I fully support approval for this particular application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hood.
Thank you, Chair. I too would fully support this. I think we should do everything possible to encourage farms to survive. And when you get someone talking about not viable and essential needs, well, he has improved since last time because he's got 36 cattle now. And if the bull would get a bit more randy, we'd soon get over the 40 mark, right? and then he may
Please, Councillor Hood.
Then he may become viable, but I'm in favour of this and I will be supporting it.
Councillor Round.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, just another question for the officers to help us along with this. Is there, we talked about conditions, is there any way that the dwelling, the new dwelling, could be tied to the farm, the buildings, in terms of a line round the whole thing as a farmstead, and that's its status?
I don't think that would be reasonable, given we've already heard that, you know, the actual land is tenanted and the existing farmhouse is not sort of part of that, not going to be part of that enterprise. It could, in the future, be used by somebody else. So, but no, the existing house where Mr. Darnell's parents are.
I'm referring to the new house. So the new house on that side of the road with the farm buildings and the stables, can that be, deemed to be all one parcel as a farmstead, so that you'd come forward a complete change of use if it was trying to change?
I mean, that land isn't on which those buildings are sited, so as I understand, are not within the control of the applicant. So again, not in terms of ownership. The buildings might be, but as my understanding is, it's the land on which they're situated. He tenants.
Councillor Mrs. Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I'd be very happy with just an agricultural tie-in. I don't think we have to get too overexcited about the house actually being tied to the land. As long as there's an agricultural tie, I think that's perfectly sufficient. I think we've seen demonstrable need for the applicant to be on site. I believe he has a viable business, despite the report of the consultants, and I think we should support this application.
Thank you very much. We've got no more speakers. Do we have did you want to speak? Yes, Councillor Mrs. Tucker.
Sorry, thank you, Madam Chairman. I actually would like to speak in support as well. I'm probably the only member on this committee who has got up in the middle of the night in her nightie, put her trousers on just to check some cows that were calving. So I do know how important it is to be in the centre, and equally had horses to boot. So I really do support what this gentleman is doing and wish him well if we can possibly give him the permission.
Thank you very much. I've never done that. Councillor Round.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to confirm that I would support the application. I've obviously tested the areas, and I'm happy to support the application. Especially on the basis that in terms of viability of the enterprise, it's not unusual for farmers to have more than one job as such, or one source of income. So but the need is there because they need to be there because of the farming business. So I'd be happy to move approval.
Thank you. So you've just moved approval, Councillor Round, and you've seconded it, Councillor Miller. Thank you. So it's been moved and seconded for approval. Presumably the major reason will be that there is an agricultural need, and that the design is in sympathy with the surrounding countryside. So all those in favour of approval? Unanimous. Thank you, that's unanimous.
Sorry, could members outline any conditions?
I think we'd like to make it as tight as we can. You know where we're coming from. We don't want in years to come find that it's been sold on and somebody else needs a house in order to look after the land. So as tight as you can get it, really, to tie it to the land.
I could also make a number of other suggestions. Obviously, the usual time limit implementation condition, reference to the submitted plans, materials. We want to ensure the design comes through within the materials. Landscaping. There are also some important trees on the frontage of the site. So in the consultation exercise, the tree officer was recommending, if the application was approved, tree protection measures. There are a number of highway conditions proposed, related, as set out in the update paper, relating to access construction, cycle provision, parking provision, refuse, cycling provision. It's fairly standard ones that you'd expect with new development. The Environmental Health Officer had also supported the application, but subject to a number of conditions regarding hours, sort of working hours, deliveries being within set time periods so as not to impact unduly. Obviously the agricultural occupancy condition. And there's also reference to land contamination reports given the proximity to the farmstead.
So we have your assurance that these are fairly standard and usual conditions. We don't want any that are going to tie it down too much, so that it's, for instance, could you just tell us what the highways conditions are you said that are going to be imposed?
So the first one would relate to the means of access and to provide details of how that would actually be constructed in terms of materials and finishes, sight lines and surface water runoff. That's a fairly standard one in terms of new accesses being constructed. The next one is the provision of cycle facilities, and I'm sure given the amount of land within the plot that could be achieved. Similarly with the provision of 3 parking spaces and for adequate space to be shown for manoeuvring and turning so that you can enter and leave in a forward gear. And then details of how the refuse and recycling provision would be made.
Everybody happy with that? Okay. Councillor Tomlin.
Just to clarify the cycling point, I was just rather intrigued on that one in the location.
Simply, the policies you have in terms of new residential developments require a certain level of parking provision. That includes an element of cycle parking, so it's simply a reflection of that part.
Okay, you don't have to have 3 bicycles, just the spaces. Okay. Okay. We'll move on now, thank you. Oh yeah, sorry, Councillor Potter.
Yeah, not being pedantic, I hope, but I mean, in regard to the permission for the existing mobile home, which expired on the 31st of May, I suppose it's a given, is it, that no action is going to be taken on that? The report doesn't quite read that way, because it talks about this matter will be passed to the enforcement team once this current application is determined. Well, determined as it has been now in favour of the dwelling, presumably any action superseded by our decision tonight, is it?
I understand that part's within the description of development in any case, but even if it wasn't, I think there would be an expediency test to be applied, and in the event that there's a substantive moves towards creating a new dwelling, enforcement action wouldn't be expedient to pursue.
Within the update paper, I made reference to the completion of the 106 agreement. So, but as I say, engrossments have been sent out, but we do need that to be covered as well in terms of the community infrastructure facilities, if members were agreeable to that as well.
I wonder, can we be assured that we won't finish up with a house and a mobile home? Would there be some kind of limit to the amount of time, or that it be removed once the house is occupied, or how do we cover that?
We can add a condition to that effect if members felt that would give them the comfort.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on now. We'll take items 3 and 4 together as it's needs listed building consent. It's Iris Cottage in Monk Sherborne. Thank you. If Mr. and Mrs. McSoley could come to the desk while the officer introduces it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. These applications seek householder permission and listed building consent for the erection of a two-storey extension onto the rear of this grade two listed house in the Monk Sherborne Conservation Area. The original cottage is a 17th century timber framed house with a 1950s additional rear wing on the back and a 1980s converted garage to the side. The proposed extension would follow on from the existing rear extension and would add 3 metres onto the back. The applications are recommended for refusal on the basis that they are considered that they would fail to preserve the special interest of the listed building by virtue of a combination of the enlargement of the existing problem feature of the roof and the depth of projection from the rear elevation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions at this stage for the officer? We can ask them later. Okay, thank you. Mr. and Mrs. McSoley, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We have been in discussion with the Conservation Department now for nearly a year. The original application has been considerably adjusted from our original drawings to take into consideration the Conservation Officer's comments, and each time we've had agreed to his recommendations, reducing the size, the type of structure and materials that were intended to be involved, including the size of roof lights and windows to accommodate recommendations made. The current recommendation, or the one prior to the 3 metres that you're looking at today, was to reduce to 2.5 metres out from the rear of the property. That is significantly less than the original application we put in, first of all. And we feel as though we've got to the stage from a practical and financial point of view that we wouldn't be achieving our original design intent to extend it out. So extending it out by 3 metres we believe to be a reasonable recommendation. The current property has 2 double and 1 single bedrooms and a bathroom. For a family of 4, that proves to be a challenge, and in this current climate, it's relatively unrealistic to actually anticipate that our children will leave home for a number of years yet. And yes, we could move, but as an individual who was brought up in the locality, it is something that I don't want to do. Since we purchased the property 15 years ago, we have sympathetically restored the property, making improvements as they've become affordable. Our view is the intended extension will enable the current single bedroom to become a double, a very small double, but still a double bedroom, and provide a small bath stroke shower room. But in order to do that, we need to ensure that the shower room and corridor that leads into the bedroom requires appropriate roof lighting to enable natural lighting in both areas. The proposal has been carefully considered in terms of size and will enable more effective family accommodation for us. It doesn't actually impact on the front of the property. This is to the rear of the property. And we would like you to consider carefully and approve the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have you both finished? Yes. Okay, thank you. Does anybody like to ask a question of Mr. and Mrs. McSoley? Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. When we went on the viewing, because I couldn't really work it out from the information we have here, it was shown that I believe the officers wanted about a 2-foot shorter extension out on the rear extension. Am I right?
We were looking at a minimum of 3 metres to actually, give us enough room to make a double bedroom. But to reduce it down to 2.5 metres, which I think the recommendation is, you couldn't swing your cat round the bottom of your bed if you only come out 2.5 metres. And the roof itself comes in quite shallow anyway. So, all in all, even in the current single bedroom, it's very difficult for a lad of nearly 21 to have a reasonable night's sleep. Thank you.
Yeah, the reason I asked the question, from the drawings here, I found it a little difficult to appreciate, but The application here is for that 3-metre extension?
Yes.
Yep, thank you very much. That clarifies that, Chair. Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicants? No? Thank you very much. Councillor Leake.
Thank you, Chairman. As members will have seen, Iris Cottage has, at its core, the original timber frame dwelling to which have been added a number of modern extensions. Despite the extensions, the whole is still extremely modest in size, and the original rooms are tiny by modern standards. At the core, it is a 2 up, 2 down, and in my view, not adequate or appropriate for a family with 2 children. Even with the proposed extension, it will still have only 3 bedrooms, so we are not speaking about major alterations. It is implied from the officer's report that if the applicants were prepared to lower the roof to the existing extension below the ridge of the original cottage, then approval would be forthcoming. This suggests that the only bar to the proposed extension is the roof height, and the size of the extension is less of an issue. However, members will be well aware that we are generally taller than our ancestors, and height can be an issue in older cottages. Reducing the height, as we've already just heard, would significantly reduce the effective space in the bedroom, because it'd be more than likely to bang your head on the lower ceiling. I have already said that the rooms are small by modern standards, and it seems to me only reasonable that each of the 3 bedrooms should be capable of taking a double bed, with space to move around the bed. The officer has suggested that this could be achieved by pushing the new bathroom marginally into the rear part of the 2nd bedroom, but in my view that merely reduces the already small size of the 2nd bedroom. I believe the difference between the applicant's proposed extension and what might be acceptable to the officer is approximately a metre. As the property is on the edge of the conservation area, and the extension would be to the rear of the property, it is unlikely to be noticed by all but the most observant in this rural position. There are no objections, and I suggest the proposal is reasonable in the circumstances, given the requirement for modern living space for this family. I hope you agree and approve the application. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Councillor Leake? No? Thank you. We move on. Obviously, any more questions for the officer before we move into discussion? We can combine the two if you like. Councillor Potter first.
Sorry, Chair, just to be absolutely clear in my mind, I mean, can I check with the officer, are we talking about the difference between 2.5 metres and 3 metres? And in old money, we're talking about the difference between 9'9" and 8 feet, is that right? So we're talking about a 1'9" difference, is that right? Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon.
Just to clarify, the difference between what officers have considered may be acceptable and the application proposal is not just about the length of the proposal, it's the combination of the height of the existing ridge line and the depth from the back. Just to explain the overall proportion, the prevailing proportions of the existing house, the room sizes within the existing house measure about 4.5 metres. So this projecting 5 metres is critically over that dimension. Furthermore, the existing ridge line of the rear extension does marginally poke over the original front ridge line, and so the combination of the two factors would produce what is considered to be an overly dominant side roof, bulk of side roof. So it's not just about the length, it's also about addressing an existing problem feature. Essentially, by extending onto an existing problem feature, you are enlarging upon that problem, and therefore you are failing to preserve the character of the listed building.
Chair, if I might, I mean, clearly talk about the ridge line and height of the roof in conjunction with this, but just in straightforward terms, I am right in saying we're talking about 16.5 inches difference, aren't we? Is that right?
Essentially, yes, you're talking about the difference between 2.5 metres and 3 metres in length, but I would also combine that with we'd expect to see the problem roof heights addressed as well.
I think Councillor Potter's answered most of my questions, but just to be clear, if they were to take down that extension, or at least take the roof off and lower the roof, you would be comfortable with it going the length that they've asked for. That's correct, isn't it?
Not exactly. No, we would be looking for both the length to be reduced and the ridge height to be reduced. So that essentially you would get an extension measuring 4.5 metres long and matching the original front roof height.
Which wouldn't be practical. Yeah, okay.
Councillor Miller.
First thing I would say, we've said it at many committees, that picture you see on the screen at the moment shows you what the cottage is like. It's unfortunate that it's not replicated in the line drawings that we have in the document here. They could be two different properties. That's what hits you. To the left of the chimney, you see a little bump. That is the end of the ridge line of the current rear extension, which, if I'm reading the past history, has been there since 1997. So at some stage, somebody approved that rear extension, and it sits up, I don't know, 6 inches, if that's 4 inches. And I'm bewildered. I really am bewildered that it's being suggested that that is corrected at this particular stage for a further extension, a very modest extension, by the way, if you stand on the side of the house and the way it was lined out by the architect. And even to make that little additional extension to an existing extension, I think I heard that that ridge line had to be subservient to the extension that's already there. That would be ridiculous at the back, because you're going to have a step down to bring it back in line with the lateral ridge line on there. And I still haven't got my head around that. To make the extension to allow this to be a proper habitable dwelling with the right materials, with the right bricks, I think, no, I don't think, I know it will be sympathetic to the house. We keep going back to the core part of this particular listed building, but we've seen it many, many times when subsequent, and we're talking about over periods of hundreds of years, bits have been added, some of them not sympathetically, but I think in this particular case, and it does blend in, that 1997 extension does blend into the core part of the house. My view is coming here, that the extension requested, keeping and accepting, that thing's been accepted ever since the approval was given, presumably by this council, to bring it out, and it comes just over the pathway and just clips into the grass here, would still be preserving a beautiful house. The frontage of the house is not affected at all. I would move for approval of this because it, if you like, I'll take out all the negatives of why it shouldn't be done. I think it would be sympathetic. It's exactly making this house in the right way adequate for, as we said before, the 21st century and in sympathy with its environment.
Thank you very much. Councillor Round.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, there is no doubt that it is a incredibly beautiful cottage, and the architectural interest, as we talk about, is incredibly important. And I have lots of sympathy with where the conservation officer is coming from. However, when you look at it on balance, this is a practical solution to try and make the property a little more usable. And I think, therefore, that the ideal world will be, yes, knock it down, make it lower, and make it as pretty as the rest, etc., etc. But it's totally impractical, and I think the harm that this extension will do to the architectural interest of that property is tiny. It's absolutely tiny, and I would be supporting and moving or seconding approval.
Thank you. Councillor Tomlin.
Sorry, just an additional point. In my subjective opinion, I think the extension with the barn end would actually make the property look more in keeping, and there's going to be a window in that what would appear to be a slab wall, and I think with the appropriate tile, roof treatment and bricks, then I would certainly support this application. Thank you.
Anybody else wanting to speak? Yes, Councillor Potter.
Sorry if I repeat what others have said, forgive me really, but I mean I do endorse, I think, the view that Councillor Leake said originally really in his first comments about it being a modest extension to a very small listed property, and the point I've made repeatedly, and I always understand the dilemma of our officers in this regard, but you know, whilst we love these listed buildings and we expect these people to be the custodians of them, to keep them for evermore, I mean they have got to be practical in the 21st century, otherwise they're just not going to be the sort of buildings that people buy and want to live in. It's just nonsense, it seems to me, to say let's reflect on the fact that 400 or 500 years ago these were appropriate for the living of those people at that stage. I think this is a modest extension. I think it empathises with the existing structure. I'd like to support it.
Thank you. Councillor Round.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I would just like to say that I absolutely endorse and support the work that the officers has done here and the report that's come through. I mean, it is absolutely right. They're taking the right view, they're taking the right report, and it's that whole reason that it's come here, because it is that just on that borderline of subjective. So I think we really should support that and not suggest that they got it wrong, because I think they got it 100% right.
Yes, Councillor Miller.
I'd like to move for approval, Chair.
Well, not formally. You did. Okay, so would you kindly second it? Okay, it's been moved and seconded for approval by Councillor Round and Councillor Miller. All those in favour of approval? Thank you, that's again unanimous. Reasons? I'm assuming it's E1 and E2 reversed around. Yes, this is obviously, it's understood that this is for both applications. Yes, okay, thank you.
May I recommend some conditions? On both the householder permission and the listed building consent, I would recommend the normal plan numbers condition and 3-year time limit condition. For the listed building consent only, I would recommend two conditions to control the quality of the development. Firstly, working details of the extension, in particular focusing on the windows, not exclusively just the windows and doors. However, it's critical to get other details right as well. And secondly, submission and approval of materials, and ideally the preparation of a sample panel on site. And I would also recommend that we impose a informative. This is not a restrictive thing, but it's an advisory note to suggest a further enhancement to the design of the windows in order to add a horizontal glazing bars to them, which would simply add some greater traditional character. That would be an option, but it could be dealt with under the conditions that I'm recommending. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That is therefore approved. We move on now to our last item, our last application rather, which is 4 Queen's Parade, New Street. If I could ask Mr. Patil and Mr. Runcie to come to the table while the officer introduces it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for the change of use of 4 Queen's Parade from Class A1 hair salon to Class A5 takeaway, together with alterations to the shop front and the installation of an extractor fan to the rear of the building. The site lies just outside the town centre boundary in terms of policy requirements, but within the conservation area. No objections have been received from an environmental health officer, highway and conservation officers, and the recommendation is for approval. Draw members' attention to the update paper, where you will see additional information has been provided by the applicant to set out how it is intended to operate the business, detailing such matters as no delivery services to be provided, bin collections and storage arrangements. Councillor Parker has also provided some detailed comments, and these are set out in full on the update paper, essentially raising similar issues to the items listed within the main report from the objection letters received. The recommendation is for approval, subject to the conditions set out in the main report.
Thank you. Does anyone want to ask any questions at this stage of the officer? No? Okay, thank you. Is it Mr. Runcie? Yes, you've got 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As explained, the application is for a change of use to allow the premises to be used for food preparation, cooking and sale to the public. The application includes the installation of an extract vent and modifications to the frontage. As explained in the officer's report, the premises have been unoccupied for at least 2 years. The unit is mid-terrace of 5 properties, 2 of which are fast food premises, and the remaining 3 are unoccupied. On the opposite side of the road is the now closed Thai restaurant and also a pizza takeaway. The application has been called before the committee to give the local residents the opportunity to present their concerns regarding traffic generation, parking and potential for odours from cooking. We understand that the residents encounter a number of problems with vehicles driving to the end of Flaxfield Road and parking illegally. The problem is compounded by the number of delivery vehicles and the frequency of trips. The applicant appreciates this problem and would like to assure the committee that they will be operating in a very different and responsible manner. Business is not a chain but a family operation growing beyond the cottage industry. They are very mindful of the impact on the local area and see the venture as an investment into the community. As explained, the applicant will not be offering a delivery service which overcomes much of the problems. They will be operating to reduced hours to those of the neighbouring establishments and will have agreed to an undertaking to state on all advertising literature that visitors are to park in the public car park in Joyce's Yard, which is only at a push and a minute walk away. The problems that are being encountered by the residents will not be added to nor overcome by the success or failure of this application. We feel strongly that the local parking enforcement team should show a greater presence and have a more zero tolerance approach if there is a problem. Hopefully by highlighting this issue, the local councillor can bring this up with the appropriate department. Regarding the concern over odours, we're confident that the high specification extract system will overcome any problems. Furthermore, through the noise survey and impact assessment the specialist consultant has undertaken, it has been proven that there will be no additional noise generated by the extract fan. The environmental health officer is quite content with the application and supports the application. The problems encountered by local residents will not be solved by refusing this application. The applicant has demonstrated that they are responsible in their approach, and the councillor's comments, there are very few planning, as the councillor comments, there are very few planning reasons why this application should not be supported. By approving this application will help show the council supports development of small business growing beyond the cottage industry and will be responsible for the creation of 3 or 4 new jobs, in addition to breathing some new life into the terrace. The applicant feels strongly that the premises are suitable for the proposed use and development will enhance that area. As explained, the case officer, highway officer and environmental health officer all support the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anybody like to ask a question of Mr. Runcie? No? Yes, Councillor Miller.
It's on the question of odours and your mention of extractor fans. I noticed there's the Charcoal Grill and Pizza World currently there, and I'm of the other pizza joints I know of, you get very little smell coming out of those. Charcoal, well, I love my barbecues, and don't object to that. Indian takeaway, much as I love it, by the way, that seems to generate, wherever you have an Indian takeaway, Indian or Asian, let's describe it as more Asian, you tend to get the smells come out into the street. It's not the extractor fan in the cooking area, but it just seems to have an ambience of odour coming out of it, just by the sheer fact that doors open and close. Is your comment about the improved modern style of extractor fans meant to eliminate that?
I can understand your comment. My first initial reaction would be that, as you say, it's the door opening and closing. That's on facing onto New Street, I think it is. So there's cars going back and forth. You know, it's quite a wind tunnel. I'd hope that if there is any smells, that'll be taken away quite quickly. The extract system itself is going quite a way above the eaves line, but not above the ridge line, so it's not visible. And any smells that are taking up through there should be easily, dissipated. But yeah, I mean, I don't think that the type of premises, whether it's an Indian takeaway, can really be considered. I understand where you're coming from and your concern, but it's not in terms of the actions that the applicant's taken. There's not a lot we can do beyond that. I think the ACTRAC system should overcome any problems.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like a question on this subject to the officers at some other time, at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Councillor Round.
Thank you, Chair. Can you just tell us a bit more about, it's an extractor system, but is it treating the air at all, or is it just an extractor?
My understanding is that it's got filters in the cooking area, which I'm obviously not fully technically aware of the specifications. Been designed by a specialist, and it has met all the requirements of the Environmental Health Officer. So as far as we're aware, it's basically as top end as we can purchase at this time.
Thank you very much. Any more questions for the applicant? No? Thank you very much, Mr. Runcie. Before we move into discussion, would Councillor Miller like to ask his question to the officers?
We've had these kind of applications before for the more exotic takeaways. It's an environmental health question, really, I suppose. At what level do the environmental health officers consider the smells being generated from, and it's a natural thing, it's a consequence of the type of food it is, when they become obnoxious to the community? Because I noticed in some of the comments, the objections written in, that seems to be the predominant one. I think it's almost a natural reaction.
Clearly, I can't give you an exact level. It's not my field of expertise, but obviously this has been assessed by our environmental health team, and the comments in here say that, page 40, they're satisfied with the proposed extraction system, that it will deal with and minimise odour to an acceptable level, and there's also condition number 8 proposed on page 43 to ensure that the specification as shown with the application is the one that's submitted and provided. Environmental Health obviously do also carry out inspections to all establishments randomly, so and to have their stringent tests. As I say, I don't know any more than that in any kind of detail, but suffice to say, for the purposes of the application, the Environmental Health team are satisfied with the mitigation measures proposed.
Thank you. Just to be clear, those tests are conducted subsequent to the establishment opening, and they monitor that on a continuing basis. That's what I think I heard. I'm aware the food safety team do carry out tests on all of the food establishments. I don't know the regularity or how often and what they actually test, but I'm aware that they do carry out food hygiene tests of all properties of this nature. I want to belabor this point, but there have been objections around the reduction of those odours, and if nothing else, to allay the fears of some of those objectors, and I can fully understand both sides of the argument here. Is there something, do we need to put a condition in? That's what I'm trying to avoid, is put a condition in, but give some reassurance to the local community that it will be monitored. If we're not sure, maybe I could leave it with the officers to make an inquiry about that, and to put in appropriate words into the condition.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we can require by condition an action of another part of the council, if you like. We can obviously record the members' concerns if that is an issue and pass them on to the environmental health team. The other point I'd make is that, as I understand it, and Lisa will correct me if I'm wrong, the application has been supported with a specific extraction system in mind, so the environmental health team have looked at that specific proposal, deemed it acceptable, and then the condition secures that particular extraction system goes in. So it's not as if we're saying we need to understand what the extraction system might do. The environmental health team have already assessed that point.
Councillor Round.
Thank you, Chair. Question of the officers. Yeah, in order to sort of heighten the level of the concern here, I'm wondering if a condition could be applied that this extraction system is maintained in accordance with the manufacturer's specification. I'm sure there must be one, and if we could at least put that in, it focuses people. It's already there, is it? It's all right.
Yeah, the condition requires for the extractor to be as per that submitted and for that to be maintained in perpetuity. Just to give a bit of background to the application, there was a previous submission which was withdrawn following because there wasn't the level of information the environmental health team wanted in terms of the extraction measures. So the applicant has worked since that point in time with our environmental health team to get an acceptable scheme. So they have taken on board the concerns and queries raised by our environmental health team and put that in with this new application.
Thank you very much. Any further questions or comments or discussion on this one? No more? In that case, I move it from the chair to go with the officer's recommendation of approval. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. All those in favour of approval? That's okay, thank you. That's the end of all the applications, and we've just got one more item on the agenda, which is at paper C, a quarterly summary of the appeals. So over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. There's only two really that I want to bring to members' attention. One was with regards to land at Laurel Cottage. This is one that came to before committee. It was actually allowed, but in this instance, I think a lot of it was to do with if you recall, the previous planning applications that had been there, and it was the sort of slight adjustments to the design, etc. So the inspector then decided it would be in keeping with the character of the conservation area. So as they just it was before committee, I thought I'd bring up that. The second one is effectively the Tesco's application. I know Councillor Mitchell raised this point when the decision first came out. I think there's a couple of points in there just to sort of elaborate on a little bit further. One was obviously the inspector supported the view in terms of the impact on the Brighton Hill District Centre, and I think that was supported well by ASDA's representatives at the public inquiry. He didn't support the views on the highways grounds, and there was one particular issue which was, if you like, new ground as far as I'm aware, which is the issue around the impact on local parades of shops, which was included as a reason for refusal. What the inspector found there was that the interpretation where the MPPF talks about maintaining local parades of shops, that's very much in the sense of if an application came in for a change of use to an alternative type of facility, so not retail, that's where that policy kicks in, not necessarily in considering would a new supermarket impact on that local parade. So new ground to some degree, but an interpretation nonetheless. The final point I just wanted to raise was really in terms of overall appeal performance. I mean, it's been improving over the last 12 to 18 months, and in this particular quarter, only one of 8 was allowed. So it's a continued improvement from the council's decisions.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Mike, very interesting comment that was put there is an interpretation of the MPPF. Now, a lot of people made the observations when the MPPF was issued, it was too high level. They reduced a lot of things down to 53 pages or whatever it was. That's an example of it, because we're going to have a tough time if we're going to have inspectors interpret it one way and we interpret it another. And I think that's been the members' plea, I think, is the best way to describe it. How do we interpret these things? And it's in a very expensive way to get a definition of what is in the NPPF over parades of shops, because they're totally 180 out to one another. And that's going to be our difficulty. I'm talking about all of us here. I see the expression on your face, and it's an object lesson, I think, for all of us. Is there a reference that we can go to, or do we have to ask the inspectorate to have an interpretation of some of these things when we come to committee? And obviously we saw our interpretation of it. The inspector said, no, you interpreted it wrong. That's going to be tough.
I think the MPPF does obviously set out various challenges because, as you say, it is quite high level. I think on that particular point, there are, it could be open to interpretation. I remember Councillor Harvey raised the point at the time of the original decision. It was if you like, councillor's interpretation of how it reads. I mean, I think on that particular part, I could see where the inspector's view was, because what he was saying was if you take it in the actual wording of the MPPF in that part, it is out of the section regarding the vitality of town centres, and the vitality of town centres is where it talks about the impact, if you like, of retail development. So I think I could understand why his interpretation was that it doesn't fall within the impact side, it falls more within the change of use side of things. So, but you're right, I think there will be areas of interpretation still, and I think it's being seen nationally in terms of appeal decisions on retail, but also on residential schemes as well, where you're having different interpretations or different amounts of weight put on different parts of the MPPF to come to a final judgment on an application.
Around.
Thank you, Chair. As Mike said, I mean, I noted the sort of record rate and I thought it was good, but also I think that when we look at it, the Kemp Shop Lane one was interesting, in much that the one that the committee debated long and hard in terms of whether or not that was a loss of privacy. And likewise, the one in terms of the equipment going into the highway verge at Mulford Hill, I think was a good result. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more comments? No? Meeting over. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry?
There is a viewing on Friday.
Which is so lovely. Yes, there is a viewing this Friday to look at the Kennel Farm site. Thank you.